All right. Chapter 17 and the final chapter. Final chapter in manual transmissions. And then we got 2 weeks left, I believe. So next week, I said we're going to do some case study stuff and AAC study reviews. So we'll talk about that next week. But for now, let's get through this chapter. NVH is fairly straightforward type of stuff. So noise, vibration, and harshness. Vibration and noise diagnostics. So you got to put yourself in the scenario of how sensitive are your customers. Some people are way sensitive. Some people are not sensitive at all. So depending on who your customer is, make sure I'm recording here. Depending on who your customer is, you may have like the most minor complaint of a vibration or a noise, or you might have stuff that's like, pretty serious. So some customers will get so picky that you might not even be able to hear what they're hearing. They'll come up with stuff that's just like a little wind noise that, you wouldn't care about, a little buzzing sound, a little ring noise, maybe a little shake you can feel in the seat. And so sometimes it'll be really hard to figure out what it is. Sometimes it'll be really obvious as to what it is. There's a safety factor you have to consider in all of this. Is the customer's complaint a safety issue, or is it just an annoyance issue? So take a look at, think about a customer that's buying like an $80,000 truck. And I've talked about this before. If you're going to spend big money on a car, you're going to be really annoyed if that vehicle is not exactly perfect. So generally what you see is the more expensive the vehicle is, the more minor of a noise or vibration that'll be brought to you. The more junky the vehicle is, like on the lines of what I drive, the worse it has to be before a customer will bring the car to you. So if you have a vehicle that's not worth more than $5,000, the typical driver in that scenario is just aware of the fact that this thing is high mileage, it's really old, it's rusty, it's worn out, and they just know that it's going to not drive perfect. It's going to have a little shake to it, or a little wind noise, or a little, whatever. And they just expect that. And so you might take a vehicle on a test drive, and it might annoy you that the customer didn't, the customer's not even bringing it to your attention. Like, they're bringing the car to go, you don't want you to diagnose a misfire, and you're test driving the vehicle, and you're like, holy cow, this thing shakes terribly. Maybe the customer doesn't care, They don't get it up to highway speed like you're doing right now. And so they don't ever drive 70 miles an hour to where it shakes, and then under 70 at 40 miles an hour, how they commute to work every day. They don't ever get it up to that point where it's annoying them. And so they just live with it. But then you have other people that drive really fancy, nice cars, and they'll bring you a complaint that you can't even duplicate. So we're going to look at some strategies and some components that you need to look at based off of what the complaint is. So the cause of vibrations, in general, it's due to imbalance of components. It's due to components rubbing on themselves, so like a heat shield, rubbing on an exhaust manifold. It could be due to like a pulley on an engine that's out of balance, like a fan blade that's missing. I've had that before. Slight little shakes because there's a pulley that's binding up, so you hear a little noise, or a fan blade that's missing, so you get a little vibration. Heat shields on brake components can rub. So we can get stuff that's out of balance, excuse me, or we can get stuff that's just like shaking and vibrating. Excuse me. So in the text, it kind of goes through a few pictures to start with. So what you see here, this main component is a vibration canceling type device. You're going to notice that on vehicles, you're sometimes going to see these odd components that are bolted on the vehicle. And those components can be simply there just to add mass to a component in order to help make it thicker and denser so it doesn't transmit vibration, or it can be there to accompany like the rotation of some sort of component. So like, for example, on engines, we look at engines, we tear them apart, you got counterbalance shafts that are simply rotating shafts with big weights on them, and those weights hit at an opposite time that the other component hits, and it cancels out the harmonic vibration. It balances. We look at tires. We put weights on tires and wheels in order to balance them out. It's not that we're eliminating the the heavy spot. So we're putting another heavy spot at an opposite point in order to neutralize the vibration. Drive shafts are the same way. CV shafts are the same way. Transmission internal compartments are all balanced. All this stuff is balanced, sometimes from the factory, sometimes you are the one that has to balance them. And so when you get a customer that comes in with some sort of complaint, a good visual inspection is always important. You have to put the vehicle up in the air and have a good visual inspection. Now, depending on what they're complaining about, that's going to lead you to maybe look at different things. So if they're complaining about a shake they can feel in the steering wheel versus a shake they can feel in the seat, that should give you some good cues as to where that vibration is coming from, or like what component might be causing it. Typically, anything you can feel in the steering wheel is coming from the front end. Anything you feel in the seat is coming from the rear end. Not always the case, but usually that's how it goes. Your steering components link through the tires to your tie rod ends into your steering column through a steering gearbox, etc. So you'll usually get a transition between vibrations when it's in the front end up into the steering wheel, where if it's in the back end and it's shaking the car, you'll feel it in the seat. So here's a witness mark they're pointing out in this illustration, where you can clearly see that these two components have been rubbing against each other for a period of time. So part of your visual inspection is you're looking for shiny stuff. Why is that important? Well, we're in Illinois, you got an old rusty vehicle, and you see shiny metal. Guess what? That's abnormal. You shouldn't see shiny metal if everything else around it is rusty. That means that something's rubbing on it. In this case, we have an exhaust manifold that's rubbing against, I don't know, is that a heat shield? I don't know what that is, but we got two components that are rubbing. Now, how does that happen? Who knows? Maybe they hit something. Maybe another technician was in there. Maybe that's an aftermarket exhaust component and it didn't quite match up to where the original location is. You see that a lot. That's very common. Aftermarket parts not fitting exactly right, and then you end up with a vibration or a noise because of it. This chart is very important. We're going to look at another similar chart that I added. We're going to go to Pico's website here in a minute. So if you look at this illustration, what they're trying to do here is illustrate where certain components are going to make themselves known if there's a problem. So if we start on the left-hand side, we got loose engine mount bolts, engine accessory drive belts that are worn, universal joints, drive shaft issues, all the way down the line. When you look at the right-hand side, everything that's orange is noise or vibration, like an audible type thing. So that's your buzzing sounds, your squeaking sounds. They might have a vibration that you can feel with them, or they might just be a noise. In the black arrows, those are mechanical vibrations. Those are things that could make noise, but you're going to feel. So you can have situations where something that's wrong is only a vibration and you can't hear it. You can have things that are wrong that are only audible and you can't feel them, or you can have them cause both. They can be audible and you could feel like a vibration. So if you have a component that's rubbing, you might have a noise and you might also have a vibration from it that you can feel. So you have to consider every one of these components has a certain size to it. It has an RPM that it might spin at or not spin at all. It has a density. It has all this stuff translates into frequencies and when you're going to notice the problem. This is very similar to when we talked about engine noise diagnostics, internal engine components that fail. A slight ticking sound is probably a valve train part, where a heavier banging sound is probably in the bottom end on a crankshaft or a connecting rod. The sheer mass of the components, what the components are made out of, steel versus rubber, all of that comes into effect. A cast iron block versus a thin heat shield that's made out of tin. They're going to have different masses to them. They're going to have different frequencies that can be generated from them if they were to be making noise. So when you go to address these customer complaints, you have to get good service information. I always go back to service writers. If you ever end up as a service writer, get as much information out of the customer as you possibly can. Don't write down on the ticket customers complaining of a vibration. That is not enough. Don't complain customers complaining of a noise. That's not enough. I might hear a wind noise when I go to test drive the car. So I replace a weather stripping seal and I give the car back to the customer and they bring it back immediately and say, no, you didn't fix it. Well, what noise are you complaining about? You have 13 things that are wrong on this car that I can see. You got tires that are bulging. You got brake components that are rubbing. You know, the list can go on and on and on. You have to get good information. What exactly are you complaining about? What does the noise sound like? What speed do you feel it at? Do you feel that feel that vibration at highway speed versus in-town speed, going over bumps versus driving on flat roads? Hot, cold, rain, dry, all that stuff is important. You have to get as much out of the customer as possible. And you might want to take the customer on a test drive with you. It's okay. Tell the customer, I would like you to drive the car while I am in the passenger seat. Or I would like you to sit in the passenger seat while I drive the car. And I want you to tell me exactly what it is that you are bringing the car in for. They may not notice stuff that you notice. Technicians are generally very sensitive to, we may not care on our personal cars, but we generally pick up on stuff that the average person wouldn't because we're exposed to all these different cars that are coming in our shop all the time. And so your customer might not notice something that you notice, and you don't want to accidentally diagnose their complaint as something that you picked up on. So take the customer on a test drive. I'm beating this point pretty good here because it's very important. You have to do this. Otherwise, you're going to be chasing your tail, all right? You can end up just throwing parts at the car and not actually addressing what the actual complaint is. Keep in mind, like vibrations and components sometimes are just from worn out parts. If you have steering components that are loose, that could be why there's a shake in the steering wheel. It might simply be that there's too much play. And so if you go take the vehicle for a test drive and you shake the car down, don't overlook things. You know, just because it's not a rotating part, maybe the tires are able to move inward and outward a little bit as they're hitting bumps down the road, and that's why there's a shake. It's because the steering components they're connected to are worn out. So it might not be the obvious thing. The problem that's wrong with the car, it might not be so obvious. It might be something that you wouldn't even really consider. So all this comes into play. Here's an illustration of how the front end can shake its way all the way through the steering wheel. Here's a frequency reference. So we've got time and we've got amplitude. So time is your frequency, amplitude is how big it is, right? How much noise is it making? You know, if I take a sledgehammer and smack a cinder block wall, it's going to make a big amplitude one time. If I take my pencil and tap it on my table as if I'm playing the drums, it's going to make a little amplitude, but as many times as I tap, it's going to have a bump. You're going to see a frequency come from it. So think about it from the standpoint of like a tire. The textbook talks about first order and second order. First order, if you have a tire that's out of balance, every time it rotates, it's going to make a bump, 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 bump. So pay attention to RPM. So that goes into frequency. If it's very, very quick, or if it's consistent, I should say, no matter what, it's always the exact same sound. Doesn't matter how fast you're going. Doesn't matter what the engine speed is. It's always the same sound. It's probably not going to be a tire. It's probably not going to be a drive shaft. It's probably not going to be an engine accessory. It could be something maybe like a heat shield that's just vibrating. But if I increase vehicle speed and the vibration gets worse, the faster I spin the tires, the faster the vehicle moves down the road, the greater the frequency gets. That's speed related, vehicle speed. If I'm in, as I'm shifting, an engine RPM is what I'm tying that to. So as I accelerate the engine, it gets worse, and then the engine comes down in RPM after a shift. It gets a little bit softer, and then it comes up again, and it goes down and comes up again. You get where I'm going with that. But one of the things you can do is pop the vehicle into neutral while cruising down the road. Do it on a safe, at a safe location. Don't just pop the car into neutral and, in heavy traffic, but find a side street, get it up to 20 or 30 miles an hour where you can feel the vibration, and put the vehicle in neutral and coast. We'll let the engine come all the way down on RPM. Pay attention. Does the noise stay the same? Maybe it's more audible. Load plays a lot of factors in this, is a big factor. So under load versus not under load. If I got a loose U-joint, we've talked about this, a loose U-joint is going to make a different vibration at different load points. So if I have it tight because I'm accelerating and the looseness, all that slop is taken up, the vibration might go away. If I go to coast and I take power away from that drive shaft, and now the sloppiness is able to float, that might be where the vibration picks up. So all that stuff is, important. You got to pay attention to it. Every time this is just an illustration, every time the end of a clamped yardstick moves up and down, it's one cycle. The number of cycles divided by the time equals the frequency. If the yardstick moves up and down 10 times in 2 seconds, the frequency is 5 hertz. You can actually do this if you have ADHD like I have. You've probably done it before, where you've taken a ruler and you've hung it off the side of your desk and just slapped on it. You can change the frequency by changing the amount that ruler hangs off the side of a table. So that's another way to maybe just get it into your head, like visually or audibly, like what frequency is, and the noise that can take place by changing the length of the component, like the yardstick or ruler. You can change the frequency and the pitch, the noise. You can hear all that stuff. Anybody that's a musician knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you're a guitar player, you got different strings on a guitar that are different sizes. They vibrate at different frequencies and they make different sounds. And so that's the same type of theory and logic you can take into, diagnosing issues on a car. All right. The diagnostic part here is going to turn to specialty tools. So you as a technician are limited always by the resources you have available to you. So if all you have is a scan tool and a lift, you're only going to be able to do certain things to that vehicle. You're not necessarily going to be able to electronically diagnose it. But believe it or not, you can electronically diagnose a lot of these issues on cars today. Pico, another reason to buy a Pico someday or something similar. I like Pico because they have, for the normal Pico oscilloscopes like we have at school, you've probably seen we have 2 of these kits. I believe just 2, maybe there's a third one. But we have these noise, vibration, harshness adapters that we can put on these kits. So I'm going to go back and just kind of show this to you real quick, and then we'll look at the illustration here. But Pico makes this little kit that's an add-on adapter. So that's a $600 component. And basically what it is a very, very sensitive sensor that picks up on vibrations. And so you mount that component to the driver's seat. So like the mounting bracketry underneath the seat, you take a magnet and you slap it on there, or you clamp it. And as you drive the vehicle, all the vibrations in the car are going to be transmitted into the Pico scope. And the Pico scope is going to graph out all these frequencies. And so if you look here, we've got tire vibration, tire vibration, tire vibration, engine speed, engine speed. And it kind of graphs it out this way. There's different things you can add to this. This is just an example. But if you look at T1, T1 is very loud compared to the other things we're monitoring in this graph. So if you look at T1, it's going to give you, this Pico will give you a visual, and it'll also give you like a graphing type of scale to give you an idea of what's going on. But it's going to broadcast all these different frequencies, and it's going to put them in a bar graph and show you which is the loudest. And so a tire is going to make a frequency unique to itself. A drive shaft is going to make a frequency unique to itself. A ring gear and a differential, a clutch component, an engine component, all of these components. You literally have 100 different things you could put on these graphs on the Pico. All of these are going to make their own noise. They're all different sizes. They're made of different components. They spin at different RPMs, or they don't spin at all. And so they all have a different sound they're going to make, a different noise, different vibration, a different frequency. And so the really, really cool part about what Pico did here is they put it in software to where all you have to do is set up a software and drive the vehicle. And as you drive the vehicle, it's going to graph out and give you a really, really close pinpoint on what's causing the vibration. This is valuable on those cars that have very minor complaint issues. So take, for example, you're driving a $80,000 Escalade, or you get an $80,000 Escalade that's brand new under warranty. It's been sold for only 2 weeks, and it's back. And it's back because a customer is complaining of a vibration. And you take the vehicle for a test drive. You're used to driving your jalopy, your 25-year-old pickup truck, and you're like, holy cow, this thing is awesome. I don't know what in the heck that customer is complaining about, but this thing runs amazing. It's quiet. It's smooth. Everything is perfect. Well, what you were driving is on a daily basis is junk compared to what this person's driving, but maybe what this car is junk compared to what they just got out of. Maybe they're driving something that was worth $200,000. And it was a very, very fine-tuned machine. And they stepped down into an $80,000 car. It sounds ridiculous, but it happens, more than you'd think. And so now this customer is, they're sensitive to this noise. And their last car didn't make this noise, and they just spent this $80,000 on a brand new truck, and it shouldn't be making this noise either. And so you can chase your tail on that for quite a while, trying to figure out what exactly they're talking about, especially if it only comes in and out for a moment. So you might only have a certain point where that vibration takes place. When all the stars align, the certain engine RPM, the certain load condition, the certain vehicle speed, all that stuff just aligns perfectly. The noise comes in and then it goes away. Well, having the Pico set up and test driving the vehicle is going to catch that frequency. And it's going to give you the best opportunity to correcting the problem. If you're working at a new car store, you have to be worried about lemon law. And lemon law states, I believe it's 3 times, the manufacturer has three attempts to fix the problem, or they have to buy it back. And so all dealerships are going to have some sort of noise vibration technology on the scan tool side and the diagnostic side to help eliminate the comeback scenario. You want to get it right the first time, and if the customer is complaining of a vibration and you can't duplicate it and you send it back, or you chuck a part on it and it doesn't fix the problem, you can end up having to buy that vehicle back. And so it depends on how savvy the customer is. They might not give an inch. You might take it for a test drive and not come up with anything, and give it back to them and just say, I can't duplicate the problem. And they're going to come right back to you. They're going to say, no, it's there. and they may not give up, and they might keep going after you, or you just end up chucking parts on the car anyway to try to make the customer happy. There's scams out there where people do this on purpose. They get buyer's remorse and they don't want the car anymore, and they're past the point where they can return it under law. And so they just make up something, and then they have you chase it, and you just start chucking parts on a car. So keep that in mind too. You may have a customer that's just messing with you. It's happened more than once. If you talk to anybody that's in the corporate side that's been a part of the buyback programs for lemon law, they know when this is happening to them. So I don't know. I've had people I've talked with that have had legitimate complaints of brand new vehicles, and they've had diagnosed to like a ring gear or something in the differential that had bad teeth on it, and it was cut and balanced or something like that. And so the Pico is going to allow you the opportunity to maybe graph some of that stuff out and figure out what's going on. Tires are probably like the number one thing that are going to be causing complaints. So when you have a customer bringing a vehicle in for vibration, I don't know what the actual numbers are on it, like statistically, but it just seems like for me, like 9 out of 10 times, maybe 8 out of 10 times it's a tire issue. 1 out of 10 times it's some sort of suspension component that's worn out, and the other one time it's just other. But tires seem to be the biggest issue. There's a lot of mass on a tire. It's connected directly to the road. It's connected directly to the suspension. And the vibrations from a tire will get nasty, and they will shake out the entire vehicle depending on how bad they are. If you've ever had tire separate on you, tread, I had it happen to me one time. And you want to talk about imbalanced tires and the shakiness. I was driving from Peoria to Bloomington in one of my trucks on a tire that looked pretty good. I don't remember what brand it was. I think it was a Goodyear, actually. It was not an old tire, it's just a bad tire. It had good tread on it, and I started going to Bloomington, and I felt just a little vibration, just a little bit. Not enough to concern me, but it was new, and I was like, all right, well, I got to check this out. By the time I got to Bloomington, it was pretty annoying. It was not like dangerous level. It wasn't scaring me, but it was there. When I got back, as I was getting back to Peoria, coming across the bridge, that's when it separated. And that last 1,000 feet, it went from like a little hop in the seat where my seat was shaking to an all-out shake of the truck. Like the entire truck was just going crazy. And it was all from the tire. And it started with just delamination of tread. And so it got a little bit of extra imbalance in it. And by the time I got back, it just completely sheared off the tread, and the tread just laid on the highway. I've never had that happen to me ever before or ever since. But the tire itself caused just an insane amount of vibration in the car. So having a good balancing machine that can check for static and dynamic vibrations is key. You have to have a good balance machine if you're going to be diagnosing vibration issues on tires. You can't simply just look at a tire and say it's a good tire, it's not going to vibrate. Because I actually got out of the truck and walked all the way around my vehicle to make sure I didn't have anything crazy going on. And all my tires looked good. None of them looked like there was an issue with them, but the vibration was there. And so visually looking at a tire is not enough. You have to consider the fact that there's centrifugal force taking effect on a tire. So its shape is being pulled on, and you have tire bulges that take place when the cords can rip and start to separate. You got wheels that can be bent. You got axles that can be also bent a little bit. And there's a lot of things that come into play on tires. So junk tires will cause vibrations. And the way you find a junk tire is you put it on a good balance machine and you rotate it. You dynamically test it so it's putting it under road force, and you statically test it so you spin it out and make sure that it's not, imbalanced as far as weight goes. If a customer has a vibration issue and it's a tire, and you're suspecting that it's a tire, change the location of the tire. If it's on the front end and you could feel it in the steering wheel and you're pretty sure it's a tire, take the tires on the front and put them in the back. Take the tires in the back and put them on the front and go drive the car again. Now, in the meantime, while you have them off the car, you should probably at that point, for efficiency reasons, put it on the balancing machine and make sure that you're not putting another bad tire on the front of the vehicle, because then that's going to get you nowhere. That can't happen. You can have, two tires that are bad. One's on the front, one's on the back, and you go flop them, and now you just basically, you move tires, but the problem's still there, and now you're just confused. So take a second and actually balance them out. And if you find one of the front tires is kind of funky, after you balance them, throw it on the back and take it for a test drive. It's kind of pointless in that scenario, because you got a bad tire, but you can at least verify that you moved the problem, and now the vibration's in the seat and it's not in the steering wheel anymore. And so you can be 100% confident that you need to tell the customer, hey, you got to buy a tire. And depending on how bad the tires are, or how new they are, it might be a warranty issue on a tire. So you might have to ask them, hey, these tires look pretty new. Did you have them replaced recently? If you don't do a lot of tire work, or then maybe they took it to Costco or whatever, you might have to just simply say, take this thing back. Here's our diagnostic. You need a tire. Tell them they need to balance this thing out and warranty the tire for you. And in that case, you're not selling a tire, but you're still selling your time. And so you need to get paid for your diagnostic time. But if you put the tires on, go ahead and just warranty it out in your shop. It's a warranty issue. Now, you will all end up with a customer that does not want to buy a tire. Okay, so if the tread looks good, but the tire itself is just like funky, worn out. So maybe they had bad suspension components and the tire just got torn up, a bad shock or something, and it's got a whole bunch of dips in the tread. That can cause a vibration, absolutely. Okay, so if you got a customer that doesn't have the ability to afford new tires, you can put the worst tires on the back of the vehicle and soften the amount of vibration significantly by getting it to the rear of the vehicle, especially on a pickup truck. And whatever reason, the pickup trucks, just the suspension design, the size of the vehicle. If you got a bad front tire that's just choppy because it had suspension issues and the tire wore funny, you put the tire on the back, you can buy them time. And it's not going to make it go away entirely. But if they got a steering wheel that's shaking, that's going to be really obnoxious and potentially dangerous because it's a steering axle. So if you could put it on the back, you can tell them, hey, look, your tire didn't have bad tread. It's not dry rotted. It's just choppy because with the suspension parts that we fixed. So you fix the suspension stuff, and maybe they can't afford tires right now. So you tell them, hey, here's a quote for tires. When you get the money, come back in, we'll put some new tires on it. In the meantime, you're still going to have a little vibration until those tires are replaced. Most people in that scenario will completely understand that you didn't 100% fix their problem. And the reason they're not having it 100% fixed is because they just don't have the money and they're not authorizing the repair of what it actually needs. So there's a picture of a tire that looks funky. In your time as a technician, you will notice that you will notice some really ugly looking tires that'll come through your shop, and you'll possibly wonder why people are even driving on them, and it'll just be mind-boggling how bad tires can get and still hold air. If it's showing cords or if you see noticeable separation in the tire tread, don't let the car go without a waiver of some kind if they're not going to actually fix it. What I'm talking about for putting it on the back is a tire that looks pretty good, but it's just a little worn out funny, but it's safe. It's just going to cause a vibration. So hub run out, we talked about hub run out before already. Dial indicators are a good thing to do anytime you're checking for vibrations. If you got a hub that's bent, wheel bearing might have to be replaced. We actually had this come in during shop practice. We had a vehicle that the customer replaced their own brakes, but they did not grease the slides. And so they ended up getting a caliper that stuck, and it warped the rotor and caused one heck of a shake in the front end. And so we couldn't cut the rotors straight anymore because they were that bad. So they had to buy rotors. We popped rotors on it, and we noticed that there was still like 0.1 of an inch run out. And so I advised the customer that they should also replace the hubs as well. And there's a wheel bearing assemblies in the front end of this little SUV, and it wasn't cheap. It was like another $300 or $400 for hubs. But I told them, I said, you're not going to get 100% of that to go away. We could fix about 90% of your problem, but if you want 100% of that vibration to go away, we got to replace the hubs. And so they went ahead and did it, and that was a good you know, a good thing for them to do. They replaced the hubs. Was it 100% necessary? No, it was still safe. Vibration would have been there slightly, but in order to make the customer's concern go completely away, we had to also replace the hubs. And so keep that in mind. Sometimes customers are going to authorize repairs, sometimes they're not. And this particular vehicle was like a 7 or 8 year old Chevy SUV with under 100,000 miles on it. And so there was still value in the vehicle. It was really nice. It was clean. The customer just wanted a really smooth ride. And so they were willing to pay for the hubs, even though the hubs weren't bad. The bearings weren't bad. They just probably had wheels that weren't torqued properly, because that can cause this, right? And so somebody just ran an impact down on it and twisted the hubs a little bit. Or maybe they hit some big potholes and wasn't enough to cause damage to the bearings, but the hubs were just slightly out of round. So don't overlook things like this. Little vibrations can be caused by hubs that, you know, everything checks out for brakes and tires, and the hubs can be bent. U-joints we've talked about a bunch of times during our drive shafts chapter. Balancing of drive shafts is also critically important. Just to review some of that, make sure you take a visual inspection on the drive shaft. Look for dents. Look for little dimple marks in it. Look to see if the drive shaft is twisted. They can twist a little bit. That'll cause vibrations. Check for U-joints. Make sure there's no play in the U-joints. Look and make sure that the washers or weight tabs that are welded onto the drive shaft are still there. If you notice that there's a shiny spot around a whole bunch of rust there and there's a vibration, there's a good chance that the weight fell off. That happens. I don't know why, but it does. So you can take hose clamps. I think the chapter even talks about that. You can take hose clamps and wrap them around the drive shaft. I wouldn't say that's a permanent fix, but it's a way to kind of dampen out some of the vibration and try to figure out, you know, if it's the drive shaft or not. But if you're suspicious of a drive shaft, you need to replace the drive shaft or have it balanced at a driveline shop. Okay, this is a strobe balancing machine for checking driveline vibrations. I don't have one of these. I don't believe we have one at school, but this is just another tool that some dealerships will have in order to help check for vibrations. There's your hose clamp picture there. Okay, so we're just bolting hose clamps on. You can technically leave them on, and you might actually see a car that comes into the shop that has something like this on there. Don't take them off. It's not some kid that got confused and thought that had coolant flowing through it. So a technician has probably been there before and added some weight to help balance out a drive shaft. So leave them. Don't take them off. Okay, a couple more pictures of tires, bearings that are bad, microphones. So in addition to using your Pico scope with your NVH adapter, they do make these remote microphones that are really handy. This is a shop tool. This is not necessarily something you should go run out and buy, but these are like multi-channel microphones. And so what you can do is put a headset on and drive the vehicle, and you can flip a switch through different microphones that you've rigged up on the vehicle. And so depending on where you're suspicious of a noise, and you're trying to isolate that noise down to a particular component, you can put these microphones, you can clamp them or magnetize them to the bottom side of a vehicle, and each one's on a different channel. They make wireless ones now that all have little rechargeable batteries. So you can just clamp them in place and they just broadcast over a radio frequency. So you don't have to string the wires up inside the car. That's how the older ones are that I've used. But you can put these on the vehicle at different spots, and then as you're driving down the road, you can flip it between channel 1, channel 2, 3, 4, etc., and pinpoint where that vibrations or noise is actually coming from, because you can get really close up to it with a microphone. So this is a tool that would be really good for your shop to own, especially if you're doing a lot of vibration work. So if you're specializing in driveline type stuff, you're definitely going to want to have something like this. If you're just simply a tire shop and a lube shop, you're not going to have anything like this. But dealerships generally have tools like this as a specialty requirement tool in order to help eliminate the buyback scenario. All right, so this chapter is fairly quick, straightforward. I have a video on NVH for you and a couple vibration videos that I'm going to have you watch and go through in addition to the quiz. So, all right. Thank you for your time. Get a hold of me with any questions.